Thanks for the invite to come out and talk to you guys. As Dr. Bush mentioned, I am going to be discussing a lot of material that is not in your book. However, I do want you guys to enjoy the lecture, and this will be available online for you guys to reference later on. So feel free to sit back and enjoy it as well. And again, I'm a PhD student here at UC Irvine. I do my research with tropical butterflies. And so that's why I have a picture of myself up here in the jungle for you guys. So I'm going to start off with the history of insects, kind of like the beginning of insects. So insects have been around for about 400 million years. That's a really long time. So to put that into perspective for you, humans have been around for about 200,000 years, more or less. So insects have been around about 2,000 times longer than humans. And they were actually some of the first terrestrial animals ever. And on top of that, they were the first animals ever to evolve flight. And so a sort of turning point in insect evolution was during the Carboniferous period. So this was about 350 million years ago, where there was this big insect boom or insect explosion that caused this huge sort of radiation and diversification of insects. And this was when wings evolved, and it gave rise to a lot of the types of insects that we do see today. And during this time, it's very interesting, is that we had these giant bugs, and I'm talking 2.5 foot long dragonfly wingspan, 5 foot long millipedes crawling on the grounds, and this is presumed to be due to this really high oxygen content in the atmosphere, and this allowed the insects to maintain a greater respiratory efficiency and sustain larger bodies. And so, for example, this is what one of these giant dragonflies may have looked like, and this is a recreation based on fossil evidence. And so, insects, they ruled the land, they ruled the skies, they basically dominated during this time period. So right off the bat, we have a clicker question for you guys. I believe this is just for attendance and not necessarily count for points. But I would like you guys to take it seriously and let me know what you see if you read your book chapter.
Sorry, they just click for the hell of it, to tell you the truth. Mike can figure out how to click. So I just do it usually until they're kind of leveled off. Okay, let's do 40 seconds.
All right. Oh, wow. You guys are a little over ambitious in your answers. So the answer is actually, clicker's not working. There we go. The answer is D. There are about 1 million described species of insects that exist today. However, this is just described. So there are actually probably at least 5 million undescribed species of insects today. And the reason that there's so many undescribed species is that insects, they occupy virtually every habitat on the planet. They tend to be found in very remote areas that are, not necessarily just not visited by humans, but it's actually even difficult for a researcher to come across these places and even know, what are they looking for to identify a new species. So there are a lot more bugs than we think out there. And a couple quick things about insect diversity to get you guys an idea of the magnitude of insect diversity. So these are a bunch of beetles here. Beetles are actually the most diverse animal on the entire planet. 1 in every 5 living things at the species level is a beetle. So there are about 350,000 species of beetles, and there are about 5,000 species of mammals. So we are talking 700 times more species in just a single order of insects rather than 5,000 species in the entire class Mammalia. So huge, huge difference. Very, very diverse animals. Same with damselflies. There are about the same number of species of dragonflies and damselflies as mammals alone. And I have a picture of ants up here. They may not be as diverse, but you know what? They sure take up a lot of space. So ants make up about 15% of the entire Earth's biomass. And what does that mean? Well, if you were to take all the ants in the world, and if you were to weigh them and measure how much space that they take up, they're actually going to weigh more than all the humans in the world combined. That's a big number, right? Same with termites. There's actually a greater percentage of biomass of termites than humans in the entire planet. So probably wondering, why don't we see ants running around everywhere? Well, that's because they make their nests underground. They're not found so much in urban areas, especially not around a college campus where there's a lot of people. But once you go out into the wilderness, and once you for example, go in the forest, you'll start to see a lot of ants. So you just kind of have to know where to look. And here I have a picture of butterflies from the genus that I study, just to show you, even in a single genus alone, how diverse these insects can be. So you guys should know by now that insects have 3 major body regions: a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. And these are some features that you guys should be familiarized with in both arthropods and insects. But what I want to talk about in this slide is the tracheal system in the insects. And so insects do not have lungs like humans. They actually have a series of breathing holes along the abdomen that are called spiracles. And they look something like this. So this is a spiracular opening, and oxygen enters this way. And so these are tracheal tubes, and they kind of branch off, branch off, branch off. And gas exchange occurs here in the hemolymph, which is the insect blood. And it's free-flowing, so you know that insects have an open circulatory system. So gas exchange occurs, and then carbon dioxide exits the insect. So the spots that you see here on this caterpillar actually correspond with what you're seeing right here. And inside of the insect body is not just a bunch of goop. It's actually pretty sophisticated. Insects have about 2 to 3 guts. They have reproductive organs. They have excretory organs. They may have, multiple hearts, depending on the insect, and those are used to kind of create a current for their hemolymph or their blood flow throughout the body. They also have wings. They have a fantastic nervous system. They actually have really, really great reflexes, really great vision. They can have sensory receptors on the eyes. They also have olfactory receptors on the feet. So a very complex body system in the insect. And this is what a dissected cockroach looks like. And if this guy's been cut open, his dorsum pulled back, dorsal central nerve cord. You can see the guts in here, the white ganglia, the yellow stuff is part of their excretory system. Something that's, you'd see silvery stuff that's part of their tracheal system. And something that's really, really cool about dissecting cockroaches is that when you have them cut open like this, they will still wiggle their antennae and legs for 2, 3, maybe 4 days after they're like this. So if you guys ever get the opportunity to do this, I highly recommend it. It's really cool. It is. So insects also have really great eyes. Their eyes are very unique. Very different from human eyes. They have compound eyes, which consist of multiple facets called ommatidia. And so each of these ommatidia has a lens and a light-sensing columnar structure. So here's a cross-section of what the eyes would look like. We have the lens here, and these are the cones, kind of homologous to what you're seeing right here in this dragonfly eye. But they also have something called ocelli, or the singular form is ocellus. And basically, these are simple eyes that are used to accommodate the compound eyes. And their purpose is essentially to provide motion detection and light detection. So if an insect is out foraging and a shadow is cast over it, or it sees a predator approaching, it's the ocelli that are going to send an immediate signal to the brain saying, hey, there's a threat, we got to get out of here. And something that's also really exciting is that insects have the capability of seeing in the UV, or in ultraviolet. And some of them even have more than one ultraviolet sensitive photoreceptor in the eye, which is really neat. So this image on the left shows you what these flowers look like to the human eye. And on the right shows you what these same flowers look like under ultraviolet lighting. So this is what they might look like to an insect. And you'll notice they have these blotches in the middle and this bright pink around here, and these are called nectar guides. And the purpose of these nectar guides are exactly what the name sounds like. They guide the insect toward the location of the nectar rewards on the flowers. And so if you obstruct these nectar guides in any way or alter them, then the insects that typically pollinate and visit these flowers will not recognize them. And so it's very important for this mutualism that these nectar guides are attracting the insects that they need for pollination, and the insects are also getting a food source from it. And insect mouthparts are extremely specialized for many different insect orders. So for example, mosquitoes, they have these they're very good at piercing our skin, getting in there, they suck your blood. Sometimes you don't even feel them for about 10 seconds. Ants, for example, especially leafcutter ants, have these very tough mandibles that they use to chomp the leaves. They're cutting them apart. But ants actually don't eat the leaves. So you guys may not know this, but they actually take the leaves down to their nest and they cultivate a fungus out of it. And so they eat the fungus, not the actual leaves. And this is really cool because ants are the only other known organism to cultivate their own food besides humans. And here we have a deer tick. Show of hands, how many of you guys have had a tick before? Oh, not too many of you guys. Robin has. She's from the Midwest like me. She knows what it's all about. And a quick point, ticks are actually not insects. They are arachnids, but this is still a really cool picture, so it's included. So ticks have these barbs on their mouth parts, and they are really, really difficult to take out of your skin. Actually, when you try to pull them out, many times their head will detach and continue feeding while the rest of the body has been removed. And that's because of these barbs that kind of point the opposite direction of their skin. So they are very persistent parasites. And here we have a cute little weevil in the bottom right. They have these really long snouts that are very, very tough that they use to bore into fruit and seeds. And so butterflies also, so here's a butterfly here. They also have really neat mouth parts called a proboscis. It's kind of like a coiled up straw structure. And essentially they use these to obtain food that's in a liquefied form. So here's a butterfly feeding right here. They don't just eat nectar and water. They're looking for anything they can get nutrients from, whether it's rotting fruit, it could be urine, feces, sweat, bird poop, anything that they can get salts and nutrition from. You're probably wondering what the heck this little guy is over here. So this is actually a juvenile dragonfly. It's a dragonfly nymph. And they have something called an extensible labium. So it's kind of like an extensible jaw. And the way it works is that when they're foraging, they come across a prey item, they extend their jaw, grab the prey, and they pull it back in and feed on it. And that's kind of what's going on in this picture here. Here's one that has found, looks like a bloodworm to eat. And I have a quick video to show you guys this example, because it's one of my favorite types of insect feeding apparatus. So it kind of, in a way, reminds me of the way that frogs will forage and obtain their prey that way. Oops. Okay, so you guys, I'm sure know by now that insects do have an exoskeleton. There are several functions and purposes of the exoskeleton, but one of the most important ones is that it provides protection. And so it's almost like the insect has its own suit of armor. It protects it from being attacked by predators or other insects. It helps protect it when it falls from a very high distance or if it flies into something that's very tough. Obviously, it's not going to help when you're driving 60 miles on the highway and an insect splats on your windshield. But in general, the exoskeleton provides a lot of protection. It's also really great for water retention. And this is especially important for insects that live in very dry, arid environments, perhaps in the desert. And so it helps prevent evaporation from occurring. So they maintain as much water as possible. And so the exoskeleton is actually layered in chitin. So we know, for example, snail shells are made out of calcium, but the exoskeleton is made of layers and layers and striations of chitin. So it's makes it very, very, very tough. And you should know that insects are ecdysozoans. And so that means that they grow by molting. And so when they are ready to molt, the exoskeleton splits in half and then a larger form of the insect crawls out. So here on the left we have a hissing cockroach that has just molted. I used to keep these as pets and I always wondered, why are they so white when they molt? What is that all about? And it turns out when they molt, their exoskeleton is actually very soft, and it takes about 2 to 3 hours to sclerotize or to harden. And so when insects do molt, they need to find a very safe place to do this because they're very vulnerable and susceptible to predation when they're in this soft state. And here's a katydid that has just molted. To my knowledge, you guys did cover metamorphosis already. Just a quick review, there are two major types. There's incomplete metamorphosis, known as hemimetaboly, and complete metamorphosis, that is holometaboly. And basically during incomplete metamorphosis, the adults and juveniles kind of had the same body plan. So the young or the nymphs will resemble the adults, and they occupy the same habitat and everything. So grasshoppers are a really great example of this. And then there's also complete metamorphosis. This occurs, for example, in butterflies, where you have the 4 typical life stages: the egg, the larva or caterpillar, and then the pupa and the adult. And the pupal stage is actually really interesting. It's an entire reassembly of all the tissues and many of the organs inside the insect's body, especially, as you can tell, the outer body parts of the insect. And the juvenile form, the caterpillars, do not in any way resemble the adults whatsoever. So complete metamorphosis is actually extremely advantageous. Once it evolved, it was selected for entirely. So our most recent insect orders they all have complete metamorphosis, and that's actually also goes along with the most diverse types of insects that we see today. One of the main reasons that complete metamorphosis is advantageous is because there's absolutely no competition for resources between the young and adult. They occupy totally different habitats. They feed on something totally different. You know, caterpillars munch on leaves. Butterflies are looking for nectar to obtain as their nutrition source. So there's no overlap in habitat or resource use at all. There are some disadvantages. Of course, if you're a caterpillar, you're not very quick. You cannot very easily escape a predator. And if you are a chrysalis or a pupa, you have no way of detecting a predator around you at all. So there are some disadvantages, but the advantages definitely outweigh the disadvantages. And insect flight is actually very, very cool. Wings come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, but I want to point out that one of the most perplexing topics that exists today, not just in entomology, but in evolutionary biology, is why and how did insect wings evolve? And remember, insects were the first animals to evolve flight to begin with. So this is a very pressing question. So something that I want to point out is that insect wings are different from other animals in the sense that insects did not give up a pair of limbs to evolve wings. So, for example, bats and birds, their wing structures are homologous to the human arm, whereas in insects, their wings are almost like an extension on the thorax, or they maintained complete function of all 6 legs or all their other limbs when they evolved wings. So this is something that's interesting to me. It's not, extremely important for you guys to know, but it's kind of cool to think about. So within the literature, there are 2 main theories as to how insect wings evolved. And the first is the perinodal theory, that wings evolved from fixed extensions on the thorax. And the second is that the gill theory, in that wings evolved from the gills. So here we have a stonefly, and they still have perinodal lobes on parts of their exoskeleton, which is kind of what I've highlighted here. And here's a mayfly, and you can see they have very prominent gills coming out of the sides of the abdomens. And so both of these theories have quite a lot of evidence and support, and each of them could very easily be the reason of how wings evolved. However, it could only be one of these 2 because flight evolved only once in the insects. And there are several reasons as to why wings might have evolved. It's probably actually a combination of several of these, but I want to point out that the most obvious effect that flight has had on insects is their ability to disperse. So with dispersal, it means you can occupy new habitats, you are allocating different resources, you have new niche spaces, perhaps new environment, maybe different climate. So all of this leads to adaptation, which eventually leads to speciation. So if you remember, I mentioned in the beginning that during the Carboniferous period, this insect boom, wings evolved at this time, which kind of led to this huge diversification. And so during this time, there was this massive dispersal by the insects. So evolution of wings kind of allowed this insect diversification to take off. Oh, and that's not a joke. I just realized that. Onto insect reproduction. Insects do have internal fertilization. This is usually through direct copulation. Of course, there are some exceptions. So for example, in dragonflies, they have something called accessory genitalia. So the males, on their second abdominal segment, they have an extra set of genitalia where they actually store their sperm. And they also have something called claspers at the end of their abdomen. So what's happening here is that a male has located a female, and he'll put his claspers around the back of her neck to show her how strong he is. And if she accepts him and wants to mate with him, she will then curl her abdomen, around up to his secondary or accessory genitalia. So here's a male on top with his clasper around her neck, and here's a female curled up to the male's genitalia. And before sperm transfer begins, the males have a bulb-like structure that they actually use to lodge very far down other sperm from males that the female has mated with. And on top of that, they also may have scrape-like structures that they use to take out sperm from other males. So their priority is to eliminate sperm from previous males. And so once copulation begins, they're in this position, it's actually called in tandem, and the males will actually slap the females with their wings. And in the books, this is actually called disciplining, believe it or not. I know, right? And even then, if the female still tries to move around, he'll tighten the grip around her neck and can actually damage the exoskeleton. And even after that, after copulation, the male will watch the female to make sure she lays eggs using his sperm, and he'll fight off other males that may try to come and mate with her. And so not only are these guys pretty abusive, but they're also possessive. So I'm very glad that we are not dragonflies for that reason. Up here on the right, we have an example of something that's called pupil mating. And this is common in a couple different types of insects, especially the species of butterfly that I work with, or the genus of butterflies. And so here we have two heliconius butterflies. These are males guarding a female chrysalis. So here's a male, here's another male. And what happens is about 2 days before the female emerges, the males cue in on a chemical pheromone emitted from the female chrysalis. They guard it, and the moment that she emerges, before she's even totally out of the chrysalis, one of them will mate with her. And this is unfortunate because there's no sexual selection involved whatsoever on the female's end. She has no way of assessing how fit the male would be to for laying her eggs and her offspring. So that's an example of pupil mating. And then we also have nuptial gifts. So it's not the same as nuptial gifts between Kim Kardashian and that guy that she married. It's very different in insects. It's in the form of food. So males will oftentimes, especially of carnivorous insects, they will present a food gift to a female in hopes that she would accept him as a mate, or to kind of distract her while he wants to go and mate with her. So these are balloon flies. Here's a female on the bottom. She's munching on what looks to be a crane fly. And then here's a male on top doing his own thing. Don't try that one at home, please. So, and before I finish up with the insect part of the talk, there are several reasons why insects are important. The first is that they aid in soil aeration. So they dig a lot of tunnels in the ground and help move around the soil. They also provide pollination services. And so here's a bee pollinating a flower down here. And a fun little factoid is that when bees fly, they actually generate a very, very strong negative charge, so that when they land on one of these pollen plants, the pollen itself is very positively charged from the nitrogen in it. And the pollen grains are almost like sucked up onto the bee's hairs. So in a way, they pollinate without even realizing it, which is really pretty neat. Insects also help decompose materials. They're great for biological pest control. There are some very specialized parasitoid wasps that will lay their eggs in a very specific species of caterpillar pest, for example. And then insects also help with fertilizing the soil, dung and carrion removal. They're also great bioindicators. And so, for example, many insects thrive very well in very poor quality water with low oxygen levels, whereas other insects only do well in very healthy water with lots of oxygen. And so just by sampling a stream, you can kind of get a sense of how great the water quality is. And insects are also very sensitive to climate change, temperature changes, so they're great bioindicators for studies on global warming also. So here we have some carrion beetles that have found a treasured carcass, and they are, they'll eat it, they'll bury it and save it for later, they'll lay eggs in it, they'll mate in it, so they really love their roadkill. And then here we have a dung beetle that's rolling away a ball of poop that it will do the same with, either eat it, lay eggs in it, etc. So finally, at the end of the insect part of the talk, I have a clicker question for you guys. I'm so thirsty.
You have to speak up.
Okay. Can we turn it up? I use my hands, it's hard.
I know, but you could also just speak louder.
Okay.
Always get this one.
I know. All right, let's see how you guys did. So the answer is A, and I think the majority of you also picked A if I saw correctly, which is great. So the best way to answer this question is to look at which of these traits is fixed versus variable. So specialized mouthparts are very variable among insects. Only some insects have the ability to fly, and only some have complete metamorphosis. And actually all of these combined do help promote insect diversification. And segmented body, that's a fixed trait among all the insects. So now on to myriapods. These guys are some of my favorites. And these are the centipedes and millipedes. Here's a centipede and a millipede. And these are a couple characteristics that you should know about these guys, but what I want to talk about on this slide is the major difference between centipedes and millipedes. And centipedes only have one pair of legs per segment, which is actually pretty obvious here. And then millipedes have two pairs of legs per segment. Centipedes are carnivorous. Many of them do have poisonous fangs, which you can see. They're very nicely defined right in this guy. However, millipedes are herbivorous, and they are also detritivores. And so that doesn't mean go hugging millipedes though, because they are chemically defended, and many of them secrete cyanide toxins. So if you ever do handle them, be sure to wash your hands. And since I mentioned centipedes being toxic, they are fantastic predators. I mean, like really, really great hunters. And so I have a video that I want to show you guys. I think you will enjoy this. And it takes place in a bat cave.
Now in the darkness, it can sense bats are fantastic. Holding on with its hind legs, it reached out into their flight path, and almost immediately, it has one. An injection of venom from its fangs kills the bat almost instantaneously. It will take it an hour or so, but it will eat all the bat's flesh.
All right, you guys are going to sleep great tonight. You can actually, so that centipede is about a foot long. So I mean, this is a giant centipede, normal-sized bats. You can buy those as pets and feed them yourself also, if you're interested. So now moving on to the Chelicerates or the Chelicerata. These are also commonly known as arachnids, and they include the spiders, the ticks, the mites, horseshoe crabs, daddy longlegs, and scorpions. Here's a horseshoe crab here if you guys aren't too familiar with what those guys look like. And the major distinguishing characteristic, sorry for those of you that are arachnophobic, is chelicerae, which is a fancy word for fangs. So you can see it right here. This tarantula has these beautifully defined fangs right here, very, very sharp. Here are chelicerae. This is a tailless whip scorpion. You can see his chelicerae right here. Here's another tarantula, I believe, and his fangs look almost like a mustache. It's very kind of neat. So a bunch of characteristics with the chelicerates. They do have 8 legs, 4 pairs of legs. They have 2 main body parts. This is in most, but not all of them. They have an anterior and posterior region. If I'm not mistaken, I think your book has a mistake in that it suggests that all chelicerates have 2 body parts, but that's wrong, and I'll explain that to you later. And some of these guys have pedipalps, which is kind of like an additional pair of legs or an extra appendages that they use to guide food into their mouth. So these are pedipalps on the spider. And on scorpions, the pedipalps are their pinchers. They also have an exoskeleton. It's very tough in scorpions. If you ever handle scorpions, they almost feel like their exoskeleton is so tough, it almost feels like a rock. Also in spiders, they do have 6 or 8 simple eyes, and they also have book lungs. So a book lung is this accordion-like structure that expands and compresses during gas exchange in the spiders. And if you notice here, these 2 scorpions look fairly different, and this is important. You guys should pay attention to this. If you are stung by a scorpion, or if you come across one, and you want to know how dangerous it is or how badly it's going to hurt if it stings you, look at the size of the pedipalps relative to the stinger. So you notice this guy has really large palps, and the stinger is pretty small. And this guy is not going to have very strong venom because he's relying on his palps for defense and for subduing his prey. Whereas this guy, he has very small palps, but a really, really large fat stinger. And this guy is going to have very, very strong toxic venom because they're relying on the strength of their venom to hunt and protect themselves. And this is actually the deadliest scorpion in the world. It's called a death stalker. It can kill a human in a few hours. But don't worry, they're only found in the Middle East. So there are actually no deadly scorpions around here. But just keep that in mind, if you ever see them or you're stung by one, to look at the size of the palps relative to the stinger. And something that's also really cool is that scorpions fluoresce this bright lime green or minty green under a black light. And so it's very, very beautiful. And for those of you that go out rock climbing in Joshua Tree, or you like to go camping in the desert, I highly recommend bringing a black light flashlight with you. Going on a short night hike, you are bound to come across a couple of these guys, especially in the summertime. And I also recommend checking your tent and sleeping bags as well. Saved my life a few times. All right, until you saw this slide, how many of you guys thought daddy longlegs were spiders? Most of you. Well, I hate to disappoint you, but actually they are not technically spiders. And the reason for that is that they only have one body region. Everything else is the same. They still have 8 legs. They still have chelicerae. They still have pedipalps, etc. But they only have this one major body region. And apparently there's a myth that daddy longlegs have the most poisonous, deadly venom in the world, but they can't break the human skin when they bite. Well, that's a lie. I took an entire class on spider biology, and I can tell you confidently that that is not true. These guys are harmless. Feel free to go handle them, pick them up. They're very friendly. So spider eyes are very cool. How many of you guys think the little smiley face dude is cute? Yeah. So spiders have pretty good vision, especially the ones that are hunting, actively hunting. For example, jumping spiders, which you see here, they have these very large anterior medial eyes, whereas web-building spiders, such as this trapjaw spider, may have smaller eyes. They're relying more on vibratory cues of insects flying into their web when they're hunting. But you can identify spiders down to the family level based on the arrangement of their eyes, which is actually pretty neat. And spiders have some pretty unique hunting strategies. As I mentioned, some are web builders, and some are wanderers. Some actively seek out their prey. So the wanderers, again, they'll wander around, they'll look for their prey. This tends to be larger spiders, for example, wolf spiders. There's actually an entire family of spiders called the wandering spiders. They're extremely aggressive. We have web builders. So for example, this is a golden orb weaver spider. They make webs that are about like this big, and they're going to line their webs with sticky silk and use that to capture their prey. And then we also have sit and wait predators. So this is a crab spider. They sit on the petals of flowers and they will wait for a pollinator to come along, like a fly or a small butterfly. And the moment it lands, they attack it. And so these guys are really neat in that they are capable of camouflaging themselves. So they will adjust their body color to the actual color of the petals on the flowers. And there's also the trapdoor spiders. These are some of my favorite hunting strategies. So these guys will build a burrow, they'll line it with silk, and they'll have a trapdoor on top, like a little flap, that they will they'll sit in their little retreat and wait for something to crawl overhead, and they'll feel the vibrations from it. And then they'll run out, grab it, and pull it back in and eat it. So I have an example of that to show you guys. It's really, really cool feeding behavior. I know you're going to love it. Please no covering your eyes. I'll keep it quiet, suspenseful. I'm going to show that again. You know, I could probably play this 5 times in a row. Oh, Dr. Bush says one more time. She doesn't like you guys. Yeah, it gets quieter and quieter. You know, you guys can also buy these as pets in pet stores also, and you could watch this every day, like really every day if you wanted to. So, really, really cool adaptation, right? Now onto reproduction in chelicerates. So fertilization is usually internal. Of course, there are always exceptions. So scorpions have something that's called a pas de deux, which is the fancy French term for the big partner dance at the end of a ballet. And it consists of this dancing and kissing behavior. So the males will lay a sperm packet on the ground, and then they have to take the female and maneuver her over it. And so they like interlock pedipalps, and they kind of like, it's like they're dancing, and the male's like steering the female over to the sperm packet, and they kind of like touch faces, and they call that the scorpion kissing. So it's really neat, it's really cute. You should watch it on YouTube if you have some extra time. What's also really neat about scorpion reproduction is that there's a great deal of parental care that goes on with scorpions and also with some spiders. So the young will spend the first couple of life stages on their mother's back. These are scorplings, that's the actual term, scorplings. So in a clutch, a female will have up to 20 scorplings, and they will crawl onto their mother's back. Oftentimes there's 1 or 2 that just can't quite make it. They might be weaker, and instead of helping them, the mother will eat them. Or she'll feed them to the rest of her young. It's kind of like they take one for the team. She's trying to make use of whatever nutrients that she can. So she'll either eat them or feed her babies to the other babies. And this is actually called infanticide when the mother eats the young. And same goes with certain spiders. And spider reproduction is actually Really, really, really cool. This is actually one of the most unique forms of animal reproduction that I can think of. So the males have a structure in their pedipalps. It's called an embolus. And you don't have to know that term, but I'm going to use it to describe this to you. So the embolus can be corkscrew shaped, like what you see here on their palps, or it can be kind of like this coiled up seashell type shape. And essentially, to deposit sperm in the embolus, they lay a line of silk, then they deposit sperm, and via laws of like adhesion, cohesion, they will kind of suck up the sperm and then store it in the embolus. And then the females have something called an epigenome, which you see here and also here. And the epigenome is almost like, in a way, a mirrored image of the embolus because it's very lock and key. The embolus fits into very specific parts of the female's epigenome. But it's as if the male were trying to unlock a door in the dark, or putting together a puzzle. It's very difficult, and if the male isn't efficient enough at it, or he's not quick enough, the female will eat him. She doesn't want to deal with him. He's wasting her time. He's just not doing it right. She also doesn't want to risk coming across him later on. And so, it's tough luck for the males, especially the younger, inexperienced ones. But this is what I think to be a really, really great real-life example of the mechanical isolation that you guys learned about earlier when you are learning about the prezygotic barriers. So, it's a very lock and key mechanism. And it's very species specific. And so spider reproduction can be crazy in all sorts of ways. There is mate killing. Many of you have probably heard of this. In that the female will not just eat the male after copulation. She may eat him during copulation or even before copulation because she's annoyed by him and isn't interested. And sexual dimorphism is really common in spiders. You see here's a large female. Here's a smaller male, and so that makes it much easier for the female to be able to eat the male. And so we also have nuptial gifts in spiders. That's one way that males will try to counter being eaten, is by presenting the female with a food gift, and in doing so, either distract her or get her to accept him. And there's also male sacrifice. So this happens in certain spiders where the males will literally dive into the mouth of the female and or lodge themselves in her mouth saying, "Eat me," because they know that if she is well fed right after mating, she's more likely to lay more eggs, and she's more likely to use his sperm to fertilize the eggs. There's also something really cool called cryptic female choice. So female spiders have this really unique adaptation where they can store sperm from different males in their abdominal cavity and decide later on which sperm that they want to use to fertilize their eggs. And that is not something that's very common in any other animal. It may not happen at all outside the spiders. There's also something called spider roofies. So in funnel web spiders, which you see here, some species have something called a knockout pheromone. So when a male approaches a female, he emits this pheromone that kind of makes her go unconscious. It makes her pass out. And he goes in and mates with her before she wakes up to eat him. So don't get any ideas. And also, spiders have some really, really cool dance moves, which I'm about to show you, especially in the jumping spiders.
I don't feel bad, Peter. Hey, I know I'm cheer you up. Are you sure?
So that's actually it, guys. I went a little fast at the beginning, so finished early, but I'm happy to take any questions you have, and thanks for being a good audience.